next page, it shows that cash and cash equivalents of $144 million New Zealand. Can you just explain that to a non-accountant? Does that mean that's money that's in the bank for Jet Connect?
It does. Part of what we make available to it, obviously Qantas is paying for all of those services. That cash is a form of a payment from Qantas to Jet Connect to pay for the crew, pay for the aircraft, and that cash is held by the New Zealand entity. We do report that cash in the Qantas cash total as well.
Sure.
So when we report the Qantas segment and report the group cash of $3.5 billion for the year, that is included.
But that's a lot of cash to have on hand for 8 aircraft or whatever it is.
We have $3.5 billion for the rest of the group, Senator. We have a lot of cash.
Okay. All right. Any luck on the fuel issue, or are you just trying to establish that?
We're just checking. We think fuel is not included on it, but we'll just check.
So fuel is not included?
We don't think fuel is included, but we're just checking.
All right. Chair, I've got further questions, but I'm happy to defer to some of my colleagues.
Thanks, Senator Xenophon, and I've given a commitment to the opposition for an hour and a half, and that takes us to about 10:30. But let's go back to the international business. I think it's very important. If we can, Mr. Joyce, I've just got a couple of quick ones. And you've stated the competition is fierce, and that's where the company is bleeding or hurting. So who are the major competitors on your international routes?
We have a large amount of competitors, Senator. So on the UK route, I think there are, on the Kangaroo route, there are 32 competitors that compete against Qantas, from the Middle Eastern carriers to the Asian carriers. Actually, there's no European carriers left on the route apart from Virgin Atlantic, but we have 32 different competitors operating against us. Into Asia, just about a different competitor on every single route. So we have Malaysian competing to a wide range of destinations in China and India, Singapore to Singapore, India and China, and the rest of Southeast Asia. With Cathay Pacific as a competitor to China, to Southeast, to North Asia, Korean Air to Korea. So we have a wide range. Then on the Pacific, we have the Middle Eastern carriers that operate, on the Trans-Tasman, the Middle Eastern carriers like Emirates that operate across the Tasman. We have Pacific Blue and Air New Zealand as a large competitor. Then on the North Atlantic, we have Delta Airlines, United Airlines, Via Australia, Virgin Australia, and Air New Zealand as competitors on that route.
Korean Airlines.
Sorry, I meant the Pacific. My Irish routes are coming in. I'm thinking of the wrong ocean to get to the Pacific, on the Pacific. Sorry,
But Korean Airlines fly Korea and then across to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And it's cheaper for...
Yeah, you do have some passengers taking a routing through Asia. There's some passengers that I'm sure will go with Japan Airlines.
Korean Airlines compete against you into the United States.
As well. And we have Hawaiian Airlines that compete through to Hawaii and then on to the States as well. So we have a massive amount of different competitors.
Okay, thanks. Because what I'm trying to lead to is what is causing the decline in your international market? I know that you're going to say there are a number of factors, but I would be interested if you could briefly let us know.
Yeah, there's a significant amount. I suppose the first thing to say, Senator, we shouldn't be viewed any differently from manufacturing businesses that are taking place in Australia and the pressure that's been put under them because of the high Australian dollar. The high Australian dollar gives our competitors an advantage in this market. It means that the yield they get from the Australian market is attractive. It means that when they look at the Australian market, what they get in their local currency is very attractive compared to other markets around the world, particularly the United States and the European countries where the euro is being depressed. So they're adding capacity into Australia because of the attractiveness from that yield perspective. We've seen the Australian dollar result in over 10% capacity growth by our major competition all the way through the global financial crisis. Well, no other market around the world were those competitors adding that level of capacity. Similarly, that's had a negative impact on our cost base because we're an Australian company with over 95% of our employees here in Australia, and we do all of our major operations activity here in Australia. Like the manufacturing sector, our competitiveness has been hit as a consequence of that strong Australian dollar. We have with a lot of our competitors have started up new operations. So Emirates is a relatively new airline. They get a lot more productivity and get a lot more efficiency out of their operations, because they do not have the legacy that Qantas would have of 90 years with the history associated with that, which makes us not as competitive in terms of some of the efficiencies. For example, in the utilisation of pilots, Emirates, like Jetstar and like a lot of the carriers that have started up, can get 700 to 800 hours a year utilisation out of long-haul pilots. The Qantas number is closer to 500 hours a year, and that's a huge discrepancy in terms of efficiency between the different businesses. So there's a range of things that come into a Senator, a range of different inefficiencies in different areas of the company, and they are the things that we are trying to change to ensure that Qantas International is efficient going forward.
So, Mr. Joyce, what roughly, would, and not roughly with you, you would know to the nth degree, I'm sure, and that's not being a smarty, I just don't know that you'd be on top of it, but what percentage of Qantas's, of the group's costs is wages internationally?
Last year, of the total group, last year wages was the highest cost item, which was 26%.
And this is international or?
It's both international and domestic and Jetstar.
Can you break it up for international for me?
We can get you that number. I don't have it off the top of my head. We can get that number.
It always worries me when a lawyer shakes his head in the negative.
I was looking at Olivia behind me. So we will get that number. It will be higher for international.
Okay, and I just want to focus on the international, because that's where you've made it very clear, you've not hidden it, that's where the challenges are for the Qantas group, or for Qantas. So it brings me back to, and Mr. Buchanan, I know, and I take it, I agree with you 100%. You should never believe everything you read in the Sydney Morning Herald. So now we put that on the record. I'll be next that I want to whack up. But I have been reading the Plain Talking blog, of which I have no doubt that you have probably followed Mr. Sandiland's writings, and I find them very interesting. But it brings me back to the international now. They've been very, very critical, and I think Ben Sandiland's led off with, and I'll quote him on May the 11th, when he said about 10 years ago, the then Qantas CEO, James Strong, said that one of the keys to its historic successes as a carrier was getting its choice of jets right. And Mr. Joyce, I've heard your comments on the decision not to purchase 777, so you know where I'm heading. But he's been very scathing in saying that your competitors, of which you've mentioned, and in particular Air New Zealand, Virgin, Delta, and I think Emirates and Etihad and Singapore are operating the 777s.
Yes.
And I have heard your comments when you were asked at the shareholders meeting, but I would like to come back to you, and I know that you're going to defend the company to your last breath, but surely there must be some thoughts within Qantas. Why the hell do we let our competitors get a serious advantage over us by a better choice of aircraft?
Well, I have to say, Senator, again, you're absolutely right. At the AGM, I answered this in quite considerable detail, and I think the last Senate we covered at the meeting, we covered it up. But I'm happy to go through it again, because I think it is an important point, and it keeps on coming up in relation to the 777s. I'm glad you picked Air New Zealand as the first carrier on your list of carriers that picked the 777.
That was on Ben Sandlin's list, I just quoted him.
And I think it's a good example that this is not the panacea or the holy grail that solves your international problems, because Air New Zealand, is absolutely right, has a large number of 777s and is replacing its 747s. But Air New Zealand are going through the exact same problems Qantas is with its international operation. Air New Zealand recently reported that its international business is losing over $50 million, $1 million a week. Now, since Qantas is 5 times the size of that business internationally, that's roughly the same proportions of the losses we're experiencing on our international business. The Australian dollar has affected us more than the New Zealand dollar would have been, and we've got a lot more competition coming into this market. And so it says the 777 hasn't been the panacea for Air New Zealand to turn their international business around, and Air New Zealand are going through a comprehensive review of their business like we are. Now, can I talk about the fleet decisions? Because my background, Senator, has been in fleet planning for a number of different airlines. It's a topic I'm very passionate about. It's a topic I do know a bit about. And I have to say that you go back on the history of this, it would be very easy for me as the current CEO to blame the problems we have today on previous decisions that were made on the fleet. Because the fleet decisions were made back in 2000, as I think at that pointed out about the decision to go with the A380s. And the history of this, I think people are glossing over, because the history back, first of all, I would say that every airline's fleet decisions is different. So an aircraft that works for one airline may not necessarily work for another airline. Qantas has a unique operation internationally. It has super long-haul routes that operate all around the world. And because we have these super long-haul routes, there are what we call scheduling windows that work for the services for our biggest markets, which are the UK and to LA. And for example, if you go to LA at around 10 o'clock to midnight every night, you'll see 5 or 6 Qantas aircraft all departing at the same time. Now, why is that? Because we like to get the aircraft out before midnight because it's a good local time. We can't move them any earlier because if we move them any earlier out of LA, they hit the curfew, for example, in Sydney, or arrive at an unacceptable time into the other airports. And so that means you don't need frequency. We don't need another service to Sydney between 10 and midnight every night out of LA. So the best aircraft for us is actually a bigger aircraft to allow us to grow. And the A380 was the decision that we made in 2000 because to LA, it's the best aircraft. It has a lower seat mile cost than the 777 because of its size. And the same to London. If you look at a London schedule, the timings that work to London are a late afternoon, early afternoon service out of Australia, has to arrive into Singapore before midnight, has to depart from Singapore at that time to get into London early in the morning, usually arrive at 5 o'clock. Another timing doesn't work. So there's no point in us adding more frequencies to the London market because it doesn't give us any benefits. Therefore, the A380 is the better aircraft to London and to LA because of those scheduling windows. Okay. Then I take to Asia, because then the next conclusion is, why didn't you go for the 777s into Asia? And that would have helped your operations there. And certainly the 777 is a good vehicle, but when we were making the decision back in 2008, the aircraft didn't have the range. It not only wasn't the right size, in our mind, or the right economics compared to the 380, it didn't have the range to go into North America or into Europe. It was only in 2003, 2004, when Boeing produced the 777-300ER that the aircraft became a viable vehicle for us. And at that stage, we'd already committed to the A380. And we already were of the opinion that Boeing were going to produce a new aircraft, the 787. Now, the 787 then became a very interesting vehicle for us because not only is it a good vehicle into Asia, and it has lower trip costs than the 777. Now, lower trip costs are important because frequency into Asia does matter. And the 787 is a smaller aircraft, allows you to put frequencies in and service more destinations is what we want to do. And the 787 had another advantage. It was an aircraft we could use domestically. The 777 couldn't be used domestically. It's too big. It would need major changes to the infrastructure or our domestic terminals. It's an aircraft within a domestic configuration, could be over 400 seats, and it's too big to operate in a lot of domestic operations. So as a consequence of that, we believe that the 787 was going to be a better aircraft than the 777, and it gives us a leapfrog in technology, and that's why we went for the 787. So it would be great if I could go back and criticize the decision and saying we are fixing the fleet going forward to recover the international issues. But I think the truth is they are the right fleet decisions. They were the right fleet decisions for Qantas's network and Qantas's operations, and I do fully support them.
Okay, and it's just unfortunate it's beyond your control, but Boeing aren't holding up their part of the deal and delivery. But what about fuel then? What is the percentage of your cost on the international
Again, I don't only have it for the total business, which I think is around 23% last year. It's going to be higher this year because obviously our fuel bill in the first half of this year increased by 450 million. We're now spending 2.2 billion on fuel. It represents this year it will represent the highest cost that we have in the organisation. But I'll get you the international split as well.
Well, Qantas have already made a statement on that, Senator Betts. We saw that they've made arrangements to increase their fares. But anyway, but on that, I was just